This joint assembly is convened pursuant to the provisions of JRS 16, which the clerk will now read.
JRS 16, joint resolution providing for a joint assembly to vote on the retention of a Chief Justice and 4 Associate Justices of the Supreme Court and 8 Superior Court judges. Whereas declarations have been submitted by the following judges and justices that they be retained for another 6-year term: the Honorable Chief Justice Paul Reiber, Justice Harold Eaton Jr., Justice Karen Carroll, Justice William Cohen, Justice Nancy Waples, Judge Allison Arms, Judge Thomas Carlson, Judge Cortland Corsones, Judge Justin Giron, Judge Michael Keenan, Judge Mary Morrissey, Judge A. Gregory Rainville, and Judge Kristen Schoonover. And whereas the procedures of the Joint Committee on Judicial Retention require numerous public hearings and the review of information provided by each justice and judge, and the comments of members of the Vermont Bar and the public. And whereas the committee anticipates that it will be unable to fulfill its responsibilities under 4 VSA Section 608B to evaluate the judicial performance of the justices and judges seeking to be retained in office by March 9, 2023, the date specified in 4 VSA Section 608E, and for a vote in the General Assembly to be held on March 16, 2023, the date specified in 2 VSA Section 10B. And whereas 4 VSA Section 608G permits the General Assembly to defer action on the retention of justices and judges to a subsequent joint assembly when the committee is not able to make a timely recommendation, now therefore be it resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives that the 2 houses meet in joint assembly on Tuesday, March 28, 2023 at 1 o'clock in the afternoon to vote on the retention of a Chief Justice and 4 Associate Justices of the Supreme Court and 8 Superior Court judges. In case the vote to retain said justices and judges shall not be made on that day, the 2 houses shall meet in joint assembly at 10 o'clock and 30 minutes in the forenoon on each successive day, Saturdays and Sundays excepted, and to proceed until the above is completed.
John. I need the House members' names. Pursuant to our Constitution and statutes, we are assembled here today in joint assembly to cast our votes on the retention of a Chief Justice and 4 Associate Justices of the Supreme Court and 8 Superior Judges. This year, we are again operating under the Judicial Selection Act, passed in 1966 and as amended in subsequent years. The procedure for the retention of incumbent justices of the Supreme Court and incumbent superior judges will be in accordance with this act. The act as amended sets the dates of holding joint assemblies for the retention of judges to the 11th Thursday of the session in order to give the Joint Committee on Judicial Retention adequate time to consider the judges who are up for review. This year, pursuant to statute which permits this, Title 4, Section 608, we've delayed this joint assembly from the 11th Thursday of the session, which was March 16th, to the present date of March 28th. The act requires that the vote be by written ballot on a specific question: shall the following judges be retained in office? There will be 2 separate written ballots, one containing the names of all of the justices of the Supreme Court and one containing the names of all of the judges of the Supreme Court. We shall first proceed to the vote on the retention of the 5 justices of the Supreme Court. Nominations are not received from the floor. Rather, each justice who seeks retention files a declaration of intention to stand for retention with the Secretary of State. By this means, the name of each justice is automatically placed in nomination and considered for retention pursuant to the terms of the Judicial Selection Act. In addition, the Judicial Selection Act provides that when a justice does so declare for retention, the question to be decided shall automatically be: shall the following justices of the Supreme Court be retained in office? The statute provides that the vote on this question shall be by one written ballot containing the names of all of the justices. Accordingly, we need to appoint the tellers. We will need tellers, and the chair now appoints as tellers Senator Andrew Perchlik of Washington District as chief teller, Senator Tanya Vihovsky of Chittenden Central District, Senator Robert Norris of Franklin District, Representative Dara Torrey of Moortown, Representative Paul Clifford of Rutland, Representative Ashley Bartley of Fairfax, and Representative Ray Garofano of Essex. With respect to the retention of the incumbent justices of the Supreme Court, we have received declarations of intention to stand for retention to the office of Justice of the Supreme Court as follows: Paul L. Reiber, Chief Justice; Harold E. Eaton, Jr., Associate Justice; Karen R. Carroll, Associate Justice; William D. Cohen, Associate Justice; and Nancy Wapples, Associate Justice. The question to be decided in each of these cases shall be as follows. Shall Chief Justice Paul L. Reiber be retained in office? Yes or no? Shall Associate Justice Harold Eaton, Jr. be retained in office? Yes or no? Shall Associate Justice Karen Carroll be retained in office? Yes or no? Shall Associate Justice William Cohen be retained in office? Yes or no? Shall Associate Justice Nancy Wapples be retained in office? Yes or no? The ballot which you receive will contain these questions in the Supreme Court is 6 years from and including the first day of April 2023 and until his or her successor is appointed and qualified. To facilitate the procedure for this afternoon, the chair will rule, unless there is objection, that any debate on each of the 5 justices shall be conducted separately. At the conclusion of the debate for all of the justices, any general debate on the entire question shall be in order. First, we shall receive the report of the Joint Committee on Judicial Retention, and the chair would now like to recognize the chair of this committee, the senator from Windsor District, Senator McCormick, for the purpose of receiving his report. Senator, you may need to go to the corner. You don't have a water mic? I don't believe so.
Mr. President, Madam Speaker, colleagues, your Judicial Retention Committee has followed this process in preparing our reports. As mentioned, each justice or judge submits a declaration of candidacy to the Secretary of State, as well as supportive materials, including a resume, a discussion of his or her work and qualifications, and samples of legal writing. In addition, the Judicial Retention Committee receives surveys of lawyers, of staff, and of side judges in which they are asked to rate the candidates on matters of competence, comportment, fairness, and bias. In addition, people being surveyed offer pros comments. The committee, in addition to that, has held a public hearing. Comments and surveys have been overwhelmingly positive. There have been some negative comments. They are outliers and have not canceled the general positivity of the comments. However, we do look into them, and including in interviews with the candidates. Speaking of which, we have had an interview with each candidate for the Supreme Court and for the Superior Court, as well as extensive discussions among ourselves. The Judicial Retention Committee is not an appeals court, nor do we relitigate controversial cases. Rather, we ascertain the fitness for office of each candidate. We could not have done our work without Eric Fitzpatrick, our legal counsel, and Peggy Delaney, our staff. And I want to add a special thanks to Representative Troiano, former chair and now vice chair, whose experience has aided me in my work. With that, I will return the floor to the presiding officer.
Chair would now like to recognize the member from Standard, Representative Troiano, who will give the report on Chief Justice Reiber.
Mr. President, Madam Speaker, members of the General Assembly. Unlike some other states, in Vermont, we have one appellate court, which hears appeals from all the lower courts, criminal division, civil division, and family division. This is the Vermont Supreme Court. One could say that rising to the Chief Justice, the position of Chief Justice of the Vermont Supreme Court, would be the pinnacle of one's career. Today, I'm reporting on Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Paul Reiber. Justice Reiber was originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He received his BA from Hampton-Sydney College and his master's and Juris Doctorate from Suffolk Law School in Massachusetts. Shortly after graduating from law school, Justice Reiber moved to Vermont and began working as an associate in the Rutland firm of Dick, Hackle, and Hull. 1986 to 2003, Justice Reiber became a partner in the firm of Reiber, Kenlin, Schweibert, Hall, and Fancy. Justice Reiber's practice was primarily a civil practice, and by 2003, his practice was 90% civil litigation. Justice Reiber has accumulated numerous honors and awards, including an Ethics Project Ambassador Andrew Young Award, and he also serves on many committees and bar associations, including the Vermont Judiciary Commission on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Justice Reiber was first appointed as an Associate Justice by Governor Jim Douglas, and in October of 2003. And just over a year later, he was sworn in as Chief Justice in December 2004. The committee found Justice Reiber to be engaging and unassuming during his interview. Some of the comments that Chief Justice made in his supporting documents were noteworthy and spoke to his judicial demeanor. Quote, "Serving on the court is a great responsibility, and my time here has been richly rewarding. I have learned that a good justice must be knowledgeable, love to read, and to be able to make tough decisions while remaining humble and human. We must understand that we are deciding legal questions that will affect the lives of real people and real interests at stake." Justice Reiber also states, "I am proud that this court is not seen to be partisan in any measure. While justices may diverge on their views on a case, we share a commitment to cooperation and civil discourse." Justice Reiber was virtually without criticism in his anonymous survey and received some comments like, "He behaves in a manner that inspires respect for the court and the judicial system, and acts with compassion and without arrogance." Justice Reiber received a 96.43 rating in favor of his retention from attorneys, and he received a 100% rating from court staff. The Joint Committee for Judicial Retention agreed with the court staff and voted on a vote of 8-0-0 in favor of recommending Justice Paul Reiber for retention for the next 6 years. Thank you, Mr. President.
We will now proceed to any debate on the retention of Chief Justice Paul Reiber. Seeing none, the chair would like to recognize a member from Standard, Representative Troiano, who will give the report on Associate Justice Eaton.
Mr. President, Madam Speaker, members of the General Assembly, on behalf of the Joint Committee for Judicial Retention, I present my report on Justice Harold E. Eaton, Jr. During my career in the criminal justice system, I have spent some time in courtrooms in the Northeast Kingdom with Judge Eaton, so I can begin my report with my own personal experience. During that time, I found Justice Eaton to be respectful and deliberative, a respectful and deliberative judge, while on the bench, showing respect for litigants and attorneys. He was equally personable off the bench. Justice Eaton is originally from Windsor, Vermont. He was educated at UVM and Vermont Law School, where he graduated cum laude in 1970 with a Juris Doctorate in 1977. Justice Eaton serves as a liaison on a number of committees, including the Vermont Rules of Evidence Committee. Justice Eaton began his career in 1980 as a deputy state's attorney in Chittenden County, and in 1982 was elevated to the position of chief deputy state's attorney in the same office. While in that position, Justice Eaton was responsible for the prosecution of serious felony cases. In 1983 to 1991, Justice Eaton was an associate at the law firm of Miller, Norton, and Cleary. That practice was primarily civil litigation. And in 1991, Justice Eaton joined with Thomas Hayes and formed the firm of Eaton, Hayes, Hayes, PC, where he continued to practice civil litigation. In 2004, Justice Eaton was appointed to the Superior Court bench, where I encountered him in the Northeast Kingdom. In 2014, Governor Shumlin appointed Justice Eaton to the Vermont Supreme Court, where he sits today and seeks retention for another 6 years. Justice Eaton has also commented on the civility of the court, and I am proud to have been able to perform the adjunctive role without rancor. Another common theme amongst the judges we interviewed this year was how difficult it was negotiating the COVID-19 pandemic. They are still dealing with this in all courts. On this topic, Justice Eaton comments, factoring the pandemic into the existing job responsibilities has always been one of satisfaction and continued growth for me. Of course, most of the judges we interviewed were not entirely without criticism. Of interest, in the same review, it was commented that he shows bias toward prosecution. But in the same review, another comment was he shows, in the same category, he shows his allegiance that he is inclined to rule with the state in every possible instance. So this is the role of the Joint Judicial Committee on retention, to sort through these scores and comments and make the determination that would support our position. 90.63% of attorneys and 100% of court staff were in favor of retention of Justice Eaton. After a complete review of all the information available and an interview with Justice Eaton and a committee discussion, your Joint Committee for Judicial Retention on an 8-0-0 vote recommends that Justice Harold E. Eaton Jr. be retained for another 6-year term. Thank you, Mr. President.
Now you've heard the report. We will now proceed to any debate on the second Justice of the Supreme Court for retention, Associate Justice Harold E. Eaton Jr. Is there any debate? Seeing none, we'll close the debate. The chair would now like to recognize the senator from Chittenden Central District, Senator Gulick, who will give the report on Associate Justice Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my pleasure to report the findings and recommendation of the Judicial Retention Committee regarding Justice Karen R. Carroll. Justice Carroll is a resident of Vernon and serves as one of our 5 Supreme Court justices. Justice Carroll was sworn in as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court by Governor Phil Scott in April of 2017 and has served as a judge for nearly 22 years. She is a graduate of Proctor High School and earned her Juris Doctorate from Vermont Law School in 1988. Prior to her appointment to the Supreme Court, Justice Carroll was a deputy state's attorney in Windham County. In 1994, she began work with the Vermont Attorney General's office, and in December 2000, she was appointed a Supreme Court judge by Governor Howard Dean and has presided in the family, criminal, and civil divisions of the Supreme Courts in Windham, Windsor, and Bennington counties. During her tenure on the court, Justice Carroll has acted as co-chair with Chief Justice Paul Reiber on both the Family Treatment Docket Commission and the recently formed Vermont Commission on Mental Health and the courts. The issues raised in these commissions are important to Justice Carroll, and she's honored to do this work. Justice Carroll is also chair of the Vermont Access to Justice Coalition, and she is inspired by the work that legal service entities and pro bono attorneys do to ensure that Vermonters are represented by counsel during some of the most challenging times in their lives. Justice Carroll is proud of the way the Supreme Court managed the transition from in-person courts to remote hearings during the pandemic, and while praising the incredible court staff for much of the work, she rolled up her sleeves as well in anticipation of the reopening of the courts and served as co-chair of the Ramp Up Committee and chaired the Remote Civil Jury Trial Committee. In her free time, Justice Carroll encourages young women, and this year she participated in the Girl State program, working with a small group to discuss case law and the mechanics and strategies for an oral argument. Justice Carroll has excellent ratings in the attorney and court staff performance surveys. One respondent said, "I find Justice Carroll to be particularly insightful and direct, yet kind in her questioning during oral argument. I think very highly of her and without hesitation recommend her retention." With that, I will report that your Judicial Retention Committee voted 8-0-0 to recommend retaining Justice Karen R. Carroll, and we ask that you concur. Thank you, Mr. President.
Now you've heard the report with respect to Associate Justice Carroll. We will now proceed to any debate on the third Justice of the Supreme Court for retention, Associate Justice Karen R. Carroll. Is there any debate? Seeing none, we will close debate, and the chair would like to recognize Senator from Rutland District, Senator Collimore, who will give the report on Associate Justice Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam Speaker, and members of the General Assembly. On behalf of the Joint Judicial Retention Committee, I want to present my report on Justice William Cohen. Justice Cohen grew up in Rutland, was educated through the Rutland Public School System. He graduated from Rutland High School in 1975, followed by a year as a chairlift operator for Killington Mountain Resorts. He then went on to obtain a BA in Environmental Science from the George Washington University and a JD from Vermont Law School. Justice Cohen started his career as Deputy State's Attorney, followed by working in private practice at two separate law offices in Rutland. During this time, his focus was primarily on statewide civil litigation, and in 1999, Justice Cohen was appointed as a state superior court judge. On December 5th, 2019, Governor Phil Scott appointed him to the Vermont Supreme Court as an associate justice. While a trial judge, Justice Cohen served on the Judicial Conduct Board, and since being appointed to the Vermont Supreme Court, he's been active in utilizing remote hearings and currently serves on the Judiciary Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission. He's married to Barbara Buck, and they have 2 adult children. Fellow attorneys gave Justice Cohen a 100% approval rating with respect to his retainment, and the court staff also favored his retention, with only one person recommending that he not be retained. I've had direct experience with Justice Cohen in the courtroom. When he was practicing as a trial judge, I was chosen for jury duty in a civil matter. I had known the Cohen family for many years and was happy to sit on that jury. After the verdict was delivered, Justice Cohen took time out to come to the jury room and thank us for our service, and even explained in detail why it was important for average Vermonters to take part in the judicial system. At least half of the jury had never been on a jury before, and you could see how sincere he was about making sure we all knew the importance of serving. After reviewing all the information available, an interview with Justice Cohen, and a public hearing, the Joint Judicial Retention Committee voted unanimously 8-0-0 to recommend that Justice William Douglas Cohen be retained for another 6-year term. Thank you, Mr. President.
Now you've heard the report on Justice Cohen. We will now proceed to any debate on the fourth Justice of the Supreme Court retention, Associate William D. Cohen. Is there any debate? Seeing none, we'll close debate, and the chair would like to now recognize Senator from Addison County, Senator Hardy, who will give the report on Associate Justice Wapples.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Madam Speaker, and members of the General Assembly, it is my honor to report on the retention of Justice Nancy Waples for a
apologies.
6-year term as an Associate Justice of the Vermont Supreme Court. And it is Waples. She herself, as a good Vermonter, says it rhymes with maples. So for returning members of the General Assembly, Justice Waples should be a familiar name, not only because it rhymes with maples, but since we approved her retention as a Superior Court judge in 2021. And last year, the Senate unanimously supported her appointment to the Vermont Supreme Court. As such, Justice Waples is being considered for retention after only 1 year as an Associate Justice of the Vermont Supreme Court. An Asian American woman and Canadian immigrant to the United States, Justice Waples is the first woman of color to hold a seat on the Vermont Supreme Court. She grew up in Toronto and New York City, where she worked in her family's small Chinese restaurant. Justice Waples attended the College of William and Mary in Virginia and St. John's University School of Law in New York. She moved to Vermont in 1991. Prior to her appointment to the Superior Court, Justice Waples worked as both a prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, which she says taught her that most cases have strengths and weaknesses, and to be fair and open in her judgments. As a Superior Court judge, Justice Waples presided in Lamoille County for 2 rotations, including during the first year of the pandemic. She has also served in Addison and Caledonia counties and presided over the Rutland Treatment Court. Justice Waples has served on various racial equity panels, including the Attorney General's Racial Disparities in Criminal and Juvenile Justice Panel, the Governor's Racial Equity Advisory Panel, and the Judiciary's Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She also deliberately focuses on the intersection of language access as a component of access to justice, bringing her own experiences with learning English as a second language to the table to ensure that the Vermont judiciary addresses training for judges and court staff and interpretation services and translation of common materials in multiple languages for litigants. A respondent to the judicial retention evaluation commented that Justice Waples is consistently intelligent, hardworking, kind, and wise. The cases Justice Waples submitted were clear and well argued, including a case involving the authority of the state auditor that the government operations committees should be familiar with. Her interview with the Judicial Retention Committee was a pleasure to be a part of, and she even helped me organize the justices for a group photo with the committee after the meeting. Your Joint Judicial Retention Committee voted unanimously to recommend the retention of Justice Nancy Waples to the Vermont Supreme Court, and we ask the General Assembly to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.
You've now heard the report on Associate Justice Waples. My apologies. Accordingly, we will now proceed to any debate on the 5th Justice of the Supreme Court for retention, Associate Nancy J. Waples. Is there any debate? Seeing none, there being no debate, before the ballots are passed out, is there any general debate? Also seeing none. Before the ballots are passed out, I'd like to remind you of the rules that govern us. And I'm going to adjust them slightly for you'll appreciate it. Insofar as they are applicable, Senate rules apply. However, once the ballots are collected and are being counted, you are permitted to use your electronic devices so long as you do not message the tellers while they are performing the duties of counting the ballots. No representative or senator may be absent from this joint assembly unless sick or otherwise necessarily detained. It is the duty of each representative and senator to vote unless excused by this joint assembly or unless he or she is directly or immediately interested in the question being voted on. You are to remain seated while the tellers distribute the ballots. If a member is not seated, no ballot will be placed at the member's desk or seat. You are to remain seated during voting. However, while the ballots are, while the ballots are collected by the tellers, I'm also going to permit milling about during the counting because it will take some time. However, again, ask that folks do not go to the teller's table while the counting is happening. Also, if you are to leave the chamber during the counting of the ballots, you will not be permitted to re-enter the chamber until the counting of the ballots has been completed. If you are ready for the question, the tellers who were announced earlier, hopefully you recall that a little while ago, will now distribute the ballots to the members of this joint assembly for this vote. I would also ask that folks stay in your seats until the ballots are collected. That'll make it a lot easier for our tellers to do their job and also to find you all with your ballots. If I might get folks' attention, is there anybody who does not have a ballot besides these handful of senators over here? Which is happening, just slower than the rest of the room. Everybody has a ballot. Great, thank you. It's on. Please mark your ballots if you have not already. The tellers can now collect the ballots, please. Is there anybody remaining whose ballot has not been collected? Being so, milling about and electronic devices are allowed. The joint assembly will please come to order. Please listen to the results of your vote. For Chief Justice Paul L. Reiber, the total votes cast were 164. Necessary votes for election, 83. The yeas were 161. The nays were 3. Therefore, Chief Justice Paul L. Reiber, having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Chief Justice of the Supreme Court for a term of 6 years from and including the first day of April 2023 and until a successor is appointed and has qualified. For Associate Justice Harold E. Eaton, Jr., total votes cast were 163. Necessary for election, 82. Yeas, 160. Nays, 3. Therefore, Associate Justice Harold E. Eaton, Jr., having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Supreme Court Justice for a term of 6 years from and including the first day of April 2023 and until a successor is appointed and as qualified. For Associate Justice Karen R. Carroll, total votes cast 164, necessary for election 83, yeas 162, nays 2. Therefore, Associate Justice Karen R. Carroll, having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Supreme Court Justice for a term of 6 years from and including the first day of April 2023 and until her successor is appointed and as qualified. For Associate Justice William D. Cohen, total votes cast 161, necessary for election 81, yeas 157, nays 4. Therefore, Associate Justice William D. Cohen, having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Supreme Court Justice for a term of 6 years from and including the first day of April 2023 and until a successor is appointed and has qualified. For Associate Justice Nancy J. Waples, total votes cast 164, necessary for election 83, yeas 160, nays 4. Therefore, Associate Justice Nancy J. Waples, having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Supreme Court Justice for a term of 6 years from and including the first day of April 2023 and until her successor is appointed and as qualified. We shall now proceed to the vote on the judges of the Superior Court. Again, nominations are not received from the floor. Rather, each judge who seeks retention files a declaration of intention to stand for retention with the Secretary of State. This means the name of each judge is automatically placed in nomination and considered for retention pursuant to the terms of the Judicial Selection Act. In addition, the Judicial Selection Act provides that when a judge does so declare for retention, the question to be decided shall automatically be, shall the following Superior Court judge be retained in office? The statute provides that the vote on this question shall be by one written ballot containing the names of all superior judges. With respect to the retention of the incumbent Superior Court judges, 8 declarations of intention to stand for retention to the office of Superior Court judge were received. Subsequently, 1 superior judge withdrew their retention declaration. As such, we have 7 Superior Court judges seeking retention, and they are as follows: Allison S. Arms, Thomas Carlson, Cortland T. Corsones, Justin Giron, Michael Kanan, Mary Morrissey, and Kristen Schoonover. The question to be decided in each of these cases shall be as follows. Shall Superior Judge Allison S. Arms be retained in office? Yes or no? Shall Superior Judge Thomas Carlson be retained in office? Yeas and nays. Shall Superior Judge Cortland T. Corsones be retained in office? Yeas and nays. Shall Superior Judge Justin Giron be retained in office? Yeas and nays. Shall Superior Judge Michael R. Kanan be retained in office? Yeas, nays. And shall Superior Judge Mary Morrissey be retained in office? Yeas and nays. And shall Superior Judge Kristen Schoonover be retained in office? Yeas and nays. The ballot which you will receive will contain these questions in printed form on one single ballot. The term for each Superior Judge is 6 years from and including the first day of April 2023 and until their successors are appointed and qualified. To facilitate the procedure for this afternoon, the chair will rule, unless there is objection, that any debate on each of these 7 judges shall be conducted separately, and at the conclusion of the debate, for all of the judges, any general debate on the entire question shall be in order. The chair would now like to recognize the member from Sheldon, Representative Oliver, who will give the report on the Superior Court Judge Arms.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam Speaker, members of the General Assembly. I am happy to be here on behalf of the Judicial Retention Committee to give our retention report on Judge Allison Arms. Since Judge Arms completed law school in 1994 at the University of Denver Sturm College of Law, she has served as a criminal defense attorney as well as a county, state, and federal defense attorney, finally being appointed as a Vermont Superior Court judge in 2011. Judge Arms has participated in an extensive list of training and continued education since her last retention in 2016 and serves on many committees, such as the Vermont Judiciary Criminal Division Oversight Committee and the Supreme Court Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. One of her most extensive and impactful works was a proposal to the Vermont Supreme Court for a family treatment docket in Chittenden County. This was a large collaborative project involving the Judicial, Executive Committee, and many other service providers and practitioners. This was a personal passion that lasted almost 2 years and ultimately resulted in the creation of the Vermont Judicial Commission on Family Treatment Dockets. Judge Arms is now presiding Superior Court judge on the Chittenden criminal docket and has developed an extensive plan to help deal with one of the busiest dockets, all while working diligently to reduce backlogs that were exaggerated by the COVID pandemic. Of the 39 attorneys that responded to the surveys, 97.4% Judge Arms should be retained. Of the assistant judges and court staff that responded, all believe Judge Arms should be retained, 100% in favor. Judge Arms showed the committee a genuine and passionate interest for fairness and equal justice and is looking to get back to the family treatment docket to continue her ambitions. After review, the committee voted 8-0-0 to retain Judge Allison Shepard Arms, and I so move. Thank you, Mr. President.
We will now proceed to any debate on the first Superior Judge up for attention, Superior Judge Allison S. Arms. Is there any debate? Seeing none, the debate is closed, and I would like to now recognize the member from Williston, Representative Arsenault, who will give the report on Superior Court Judge Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Madam Speaker, and members of the General Assembly. It is my pleasure to report to this joint assembly the findings and recommendation of the Judicial Retention Committee regarding Superior Court Judge Thomas Carlson. Judge Carlson was appointed to the judiciary in 2015 and is currently presiding in the Family Division in Chittenden County. He has also served in Lamoille, Addison, and Franklin counties, presiding over a variety of dockets. Prior to becoming a judge, Carlson worked in private practice for more than 30 years, handling a wide range of cases and as a mediator. He earned his law degree from the National Law Center at George Washington University and completed the Harvard Law School mediation program. In addition to his work on the bench, Judge Carlson currently serves as the chair of the Family Rules Committee and vice chair of the Vermont Judiciary Commission on Mental Health and the Courts. As Judge Carlson explained in his letter to the Retention Committee, quote, communities, police, and other first responders have huge challenges with behavior that cannot continue, but for which a criminal process is no useful answer, and often is not, makes things worse, end quote. Chief Justice Reiber convened a commission made up of members of the judicial, executive, and legislative branches of government to learn about different response models and to adapt them to our state. Of this work, Judge Carlson further stated, quote, I am lucky to be a part of it, learning from the full range of mental health, law enforcement, and school providers and agency administrators here. It is a great mission. I am optimistic for it. even as there is a ton of work to do, end quote. The feedback this committee received about Judge Carlson via anonymous survey was overwhelmingly positive. He was recommended for retention by attorneys and court staff alike. And in one of the most revealing moments of this committee's conversation with him, Judge Carlson became quite emotional while discussing one of the negative comments he received. It was a comment made by an attorney describing a potential issue with the judge relying on sexist stereotypes. Judge Carlson addressed this comment directly before it was brought up by any committee members, sharing how deeply it struck him and speaking of his mother as a woman who blazed her own trail and broke every glass ceiling, a trait that Judge Carlson clearly respects and admires. His concern about this comment was genuine, and his willingness to be vulnerable stood in stark contrast to a small number of other judges who chose instead to dismiss or minimize such feedback. I believe that Judge Carlson took this feedback to heart and will be more aware of any potential tendency or implicit bias moving forward. Your Judicial Retention Committee voted unanimously 8-0-0 to recommend Judge Carlson for retention, and we hope you will concur.
We will now proceed to any debate on the second Superior Judge up for retention, Superior Judge Thomas Carlson. Is there any debate? Seeing none, we will close debate. And I will now recognize the Senator from Rutland District, Senator Collmore, who will give the report on Superior Court Judge Corsons.
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, Madam Speaker and members of the General Assembly, I'm happy to report the Joint Retention Committee's recommendation on Judge Cortland Corsons, who has served as a Vermont Superior Court judge since March of 2007. He's currently assigned to the Rutland Criminal Division and is the presiding judge for the Rutland Unit. Before his current assignment, he was the presiding judge in the Bennington Unit, serving in the civil and criminal divisions. Judge Corsons was the presiding judge in Bennington during the COVID epidemic, and he worked closely with staff and justice partners to resume trials within the unit as expeditiously and safely as possible, as well as working to resume full operation of the courts. Before his time in Bennington, Judge Corsons was the Rutland Unit presiding judge serving in the Family Division. Part of his assigned duties included being the presiding judge in the Rutland County Treatment Court. Since his last retention, Judge Corsons has served on many judicial committees and boards, including the Judicial Conduct Board, the Ethics and Professionalism Committee, Waiver Penalty Panel, Judicial Restart Committee for the Civil Division, Act 14 Implementation Committee, Domestic Violence Fatality Commission, Family Rules Committee, and Judicial College Planning Committee. Judge Corsons has been a regular presenter at Judicial College, the Vermont Bar Association, the Rutland County Bar Association, and the Joan Loring Wing Inns of Court. Judge Corsons received his undergraduate degree from Dartmouth College in 1978 and his law degree from Cornell University in 1981. Thereafter, he practiced law for 25 years with the Rutland firm of Corsons and Corsons, where he had a general trial practice before being appointed to the bench. Attorneys gave him a 97% favorable rating for retention, and the court staff gave him a 90% favorable rating. Many of us have attended various court days where we are invited to attend and see judges in action. And I've been to several of these over the last 9 years. I've seen firsthand the manner in which Judge Corsons manages the courtroom. I've personally witnessed his gentle, thoughtful, and fair examination of the circumstances of each case before him. Therefore, it gives me great honor to report that the Retention Committee voted 8-0-0 to recommend Judge Cortland Corsons be retained for another 6-year term. Thank you, Mr. President.
We will now proceed to any debate on the third Superior Judge up for retention, Superior Judge Cortland T. Corsons. Is there any debate? Seeing none, we will close debate. And the chair would now like to recognize a representative from Rutland City, Representative Knott, who will give the report on Superior Court Judge Giron.
Thank you. The Honorable Justice Giron attended Albany Law School and began his legal career as an associate in a Glens Falls law firm. He moved to Vermont in 2002 to take a position as a deputy state's attorney. He was appointed a Superior Court judge in 2022. This brings us to an interesting aspect of judicial retention. While retention occurs every 6 years, this process is tied to a particular judicial seat, not the individual holding it, which is why Judge Giron has come up for judicial retention just 1 year into his judicial career. While there were some negative comments in response to the survey that is part of the retention process, the committee's concerns were tempered by the fact that he is so new to the bench. As part of the process for new judges, Judge Giron already has a judicial mentor and is taking steps to grow in his new role. Given this, the committee was comfortable recommending Judge Giron for retention and made this recommendation on a unanimous 8-0 vote. We ask you to retain Judge Giron for another 6 years. Thank you.
We will now proceed to any debate on the fourth Superior Judge up for retention, Superior Judge Justin Giron. Is there any debate? Seeing none, we will close debate. And the chair would now like to recognize Senator from Windsor District, Senator McCormick, who will give the report on Superior Court Judge Kanan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Madam Speaker, colleagues, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to recommend, in behalf of the Judicial Retention Committee, that Michael Kanan be retained for another term. Michael Kanan was born on Christmas Day in 1965, earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Connecticut in 1984, and his JD and Master of Legal Studies from the Vermont Law School in 1992. His public service includes years as Hartford moderator, a commissioner on the Housing Authority, several terms as state representative from Hartford, and the director of the State Sentencing Commission. He also was the Windsor County State's attorney. He was appointed Superior Court Judge in 2017. During those years of service since, he has been the chair of the Supreme Court's Advisory Committee on Family Rules. In the surveys among lawyers and side judges and staff, he got rave reviews on all the criteria regarding knowledge, competence, comportment, integrity. Lawyers recommended he be retained 100%, and 100% of the side judges and staff recommended retention. I should mention that Judge Kanan really began his career of public service as a Republican candidate for state Senate, but I won. Anyone who has ever been in a contested race, which I presume is most of the people here, knows that when you run against somebody, you take their measure. And I took Michael Kanan's measure many years ago. I know him to be a decent, good man, an intelligent man, a competent man. I liked the fact at the time, he was very young, that his grandfather was his campaign manager. And I have come to consider him a friend ever since. I will close with one of the comments from one of the lawyers who we interviewed, or from whom we took testimony. Others in the judiciary should follow his example of fairness, thoughtfulness, and consideration towards everyone who is in his courtroom. The vote of the committee was unanimous to recommend that Judge Michael Kanan be retained. Thank you, Mr. President.
We'll now proceed to any debate on the fifth Superior Judge up for retention, Superior Judge Michael R. Kanan. Is there any debate? Seeing none, we'll close debate. And the chair would now like to recognize the Senator from Chittenden Central District, Senator Gulick, who will report on Superior Judge Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my pleasure to report The findings and recommendation of the Judicial Retention Committee regarding Superior Court Judge Mary Morrissey. Judge Morrissey is a resident of Jericho and was sworn in as a Superior Court Judge by Governor Shumlin in 2016. She was appointed the presiding judge in both Franklin County and Grand Isle County in 2021. Judge Morrissey's legal career began in 1994 when she was hired as a deputy state's attorney with the Chittenden County State's Attorney's Office, where she spent the next 20 years. She's a graduate of both St. Michael's College and Franklin Pierce Law Center and serves on several committees, including the Vermont Bar Association, the Advisory Committee on the Rules of Public Access to Court Records, the Vermont Family Division Oversight Committee, the Vermont Judiciary Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and the Racial Disparities in the Criminal and Juvenile Justice System Advisory Panel. Judge Morrissey's accomplishments are many. However, most striking to me were her performance surveys, which I believe were probably the most stellar in our committee. From attorneys, we heard she has always been compassionate to litigants who need support without showing bias and favoritism, and runs the courtroom efficiently and with integrity. And Judge Morrissey is one of the best, if perhaps the best judge I've appeared in front of in the 25 years I've been practicing in Vermont. I could go on, but I know it's getting late, so I will jump to my next point. When we met Judge Morrissey, it was clear to the committee that she is both inspiring and inspired by and passionate about her work as a Superior Court judge. In her words, presiding over cases, whether working with a treatment court participant on their path to sobriety, trying to bring stability and permanency to children in the juvenile and domestic dockets, or bringing closure to criminal cases and those impacted by violent crimes, is dynamic in nature, and there is not a day that goes by that I do not learn something new about myself or how to more effectively do the job that Governor Shumlin entrusted me with in February 2016. With that, I will report that your Judicial Retention Committee voted 8-0-0 to recommend retaining Judge Mary Morrissey, and we ask that you concur. Thank you, Mr. President.
We will now proceed to any debate on the sixth Superior Judge up for retention, Superior Judge Mary Morrissey. Is there any debate? Seeing none, we will close the debate, and the chair would now like to recognize a member from Rutland City, Representative Knott, for the report on Superior Court Judge Schoonover.
Thank you, Mr. President. Judge Kirsten Schoonover was originally appointed to the Vermont Superior Court in 2015. Before this, she has worked as an assistant public defender, assistant attorney general, and staff attorney with Vermont Legal Aid. She has sat primarily in Washington and Chittenden counties, managing dockets for the family, criminal, mental health, and juvenile courts. Since September, she has served as a presiding judge in the family division in Chittenden County. Judge Schoonover had mainly favorable comments in her survey and showed interest, intelligence, and a commitment to the court system when appearing before the Judicial Retention Committee. We recommended her retention on a unanimous 8-0 vote, and we ask you to retain this judge for an additional 6 years. Thank you.
We will now proceed to any debate on the seventh Superior Judge up for retention, Superior Judge Kirsten Schoonover. Is there any debate? Seeing none, we will close debate. Is there any general debate? Seeing none, we will close that debate. Being there no further debate, please, before the balloting, you are reminded of the rules that I announced earlier. You must be seated in order to receive a ballot, and you must remain seated while the ballots are distributed, marked, and collected. Afterwards, you're welcome to mill about, preferably not around the counting table. And if you must leave the chamber during the counting of the ballots, you will not be permitted to return until the counting of the ballots has been completed. The tellers will now distribute the ballots to the members of this joint assembly for this vote. Has everyone who needs a ballot received a ballot? If you haven't already voted, you are welcome to vote your ballot. Thank you for your patience. Please listen to the results of your vote. For Superior Judge Allison Arms, total votes cast 161, necessary for election 82, yeas 161, nays 0. Superior Judge Allison S. Arms, having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Superior Judge for a term of 6 years, from and including the first day of April 2023 and until her successor is appointed and as qualified. For Superior Judge Thomas Carlson, total votes cast 160, necessary for election 81, yeas 157, nays 3. Superior Judge Thomas Carlson, having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Superior Judge for a term of 6 years, from and including the first day of April 2023 until his successor is appointed and as qualified. For Superior Judge Cortland T. Corsones, total votes cast 160, necessary for election 81, yeas 156, nays 4. Superior Judge Cortland T. Corsones, having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Superior Judge for a term of 6 years, from and including the first day of April 2023 and until a successor is appointed and as qualified. Am I going too fast for anyone, or is it okay? For Superior Judge Justin Giron, total votes cast 159, necessary for election 80, yeas 150, nays 9. Superior Judge Justice Giron, having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Superior Judge for a term of 6 years, from and including the first day of April 2023 until a successor is appointed and as qualified. For Superior Judge Michael R. Kanan, total votes cast 159, necessary for election 80, yeas 156, nays 3. Superior Judge Michael R. Kanan, having received a majority of total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Superior Judge for a term of 6 years, from and including the first day of April 2023 and until a successor is appointed and as qualified. For Superior Judge Mary Morrissey, total votes cast 161, necessary for election 81, yeas 158, nays 3. Superior Judge Mary Morrissey, having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Superior Judge for a term of 6 years, from and including the first day of April 2023 and until her successor is appointed and as qualified. For Superior Judge Kirsten Schoonover, total votes cast 161, necessary for election 81, yeas 159, nays 2. Superior Judge Kirsten Schoonover, having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared elected to the office of Superior Judge for a term of 6 years, from and including the first day of April 2023 and until her successor is appointed and is qualified. There being no further business, I do hereby declare this joint assembly dissolved.